Welcome to Learning Aloud, a podcast from the organizational dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania, produced to inspire purposeful leadership practice and transform organizational experience. I am your host, Zach Davis. My guest in our virtual Zoom studio today is Charles Dormer, principal and founder of APEX STP, a coaching organization focused on helping leaders and groups maximize the speed of their journey to dynamic, impactful leadership through coaching, mentoring, and teaching. Charles leverages many of his skills and experiences gained from over 30 years working within leaders of the global pharmaceutical industry. Charles holds both a master's in organizational dynamics and a master's in philosophy from our program. He coaches leaders to leverage systems thinking and a results and action-oriented approach to tackle complex business problems. He holds a number of coaching certifications and runs a program on strategic leadership and technology at Georgetown University, where he currently holds a position of adjunct lecturer. He's also been a guest lecturer at Alvernia, Penn State, and here in our program. A focal point in Charles's work is helping leaders understand personal power through presence, through self-awareness, personal accountability, and taking action. Charles has joined me today to share his thoughts on how leaders can enhance their impact, especially in this area of increased virtual communications. Charles, welcome to Learning Aloud.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
That's great. It's great to have you. So let's talk a little bit more about your background. You spent a number of years in the pharma industry, but in our earlier conversations, you segmented this experience into different passions. So what does your professional journey look like?
Yes, that's a good question, and it's a lot easier to answer in hindsight than it was as I was going through it. But reflecting on my career, I started out working in pathology labs in the National Health Service, actually in the UK, and I really got interested in the histology and different cell types and structure of cells, and really got interested in how cells can be both functional but also can be dysfunctional, like in cancer, for etc. And that really was the start of my first passion, really, which was understanding how cells work. I moved into the pharma industry mainly because I really was looking for a purpose, which certainly, as I was not directly involved in patients, but certainly I had this purpose of wanting to get drugs to patients to help them with their unmet need. You know, I always had in my mind this image of a screaming child in the middle of the night in pain with an infection, and knowing that one of the ways to alleviate that pain was to find drugs which would help them. And so throughout my pharmaceutical career, I certainly was always thinking about how could I best position myself and lead in different ways so that we could kind of maximize getting drugs to patients with unmet need. And as I worked in pharma, so I worked in a histology lab and had a histology group, and became more and more interested in how the organization was working in operations, and was given the opportunity to move to the United States 30 years ago. So I've been here a long time. You probably think that this accent would have gone by now, but I keep going back. So I keep getting it back.
You recharge?
Recharge it. Ironically, they think I sound American, which I don't know what that means. Okay, good. So as I became more and more interested in how organizations work, this is when I got involved with the Penn programs. Because I really wanted to learn how organizational dynamics work and how best that I could contribute to helping large pharma companies. And I took, as you mentioned, I took both the MS and the MPhil programs. And my thesis for the first master's degree was looking at critical success factors in strategic alliances. As you're probably aware, a lot of pharma companies access science and talent through collaborations. So I really got interested in how organizations work, particularly how complex networks of organizations work. And that really was my second passion. And if you think about it, it wasn't too disconnected from my first, because I look at organizations as being human systems, and it's not dissimilar to the way cells interact and the way systems work and organs work, etc.
Okay.
In terms of organization.
So how does that collection of experiences, how does that help inform the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, so after my pharmaceutical career, I actually then left the final company I was working for in 2014, and I wanted to set up a consulting company. But I realized, as I did a lot of business redesign and was involved in a couple of big mergers, and as I say, involved in some collaborations, I realized the thing I really enjoyed and the time I felt I had the biggest impact is when I was working with senior leaders and helping them to be as productive as possible. Back to my little cell analogy, obviously leaders are putting out signals to the other people in their organization, and I really felt that I wanted to work with leaders and help them be more productive, knowing that if they're more productive, then people in their care and other parts of the organization will be more productive. So I started training as an executive coach, and I probably spend most of my time in executive coaching across multiple industries, including pharma. So that was really my journey to the three passions being understanding cells and dysfunctions in cells and how they work within systems, understanding organizations and how to optimize those systems to reach their purpose, and now working with leaders to make them as productive as they can be and make their teams and groups as productive.
So I do want to ask you a question about that. You said something interesting about how cells send out signals, and
Yep.
those signals are something that helps influence their interactions with other cells. How do you help leaders realize or become aware of the types of signals that they're transmitting or the impact they might have?
Yeah, so I think in terms of coaching, an important first step is to develop the leader's self-awareness and reflect back how they actually are signaling to others. And we use a variety of tools to help that process, but really it's not always obvious how leaders are showing up, and being self-aware of how you show up and what signals you're giving out to others. I think is actually critical to motivating people and energizing people in your organization. Okay,
and that ties in with recently you were a guest lecturer in the Agile Strategies class within our MSOD program. Steve Hart and Wayne Clarkin co-taught that this spring, and you talked about some of the cornerstone concepts of that coaching approach. Including a leader's ability to create that impact that you're talking about. So what does that concept mean to you, and how does that manifest in the approach that you take towards coaching a leader around their own self-awareness?
Yeah, so I very much take the view that one of the key roles of a leader is to create energy in others, and actually positive energy in others. And it leads to people being engaged and motivated. And I think this, if you think about leadership as what you're doing as a leader, am I creating energy for what I want to do, or am I destroying energy? So let me take an example. So we talk a lot about authenticity in leadership and in coaching. And I think, to me, one of the key things of a leader is to be authentic. That absolutely, if you believe somebody is authentic and is being open and honest with you, you're more likely to build trust with that person. And of course, and therefore you're more energized to to follow that leader. Of course, the opposite is true, right? If you feel that somebody is not authentic and somebody you can't trust, then it's much more likely to form a kind of negative energy set, and often organizations become very political.
So help me understand, what are some of the ways that leaders, in your experience, that leaders can help to build that trust?
Yeah, so there are some there are some things which I can usually predict will help a leader be positive. One is around demonstration of empathy. If leaders truly are empathetic to the people that are working with, whether it be their boss, their peers, or their staff, or collaborators, or whatever that looks like, actually spending time really understanding and picking up cues of how other people feel is very valuable. And maybe we'll talk a little bit, Zach, about how you do that virtually, because all of these aspects are equally, if not more important, when you're in a virtual environment versus face-to-face. Other things which, again, I think another cornerstone is actually having a growth mindset. And to me, that means that you are open to learning, that you're not going in with a fixed view of the world, but you're open to learning from others of diverse backgrounds, who have different experiences, and who have different ideas. Being open to that learning is very important. I think the other thing which I think there are two other pieces which I would always seem to come up a lot in when I'm coaching people, is having focused listening, the ability to actually truly listen to what people are saying, and not just pretending you're listening, but actually really listening. And then also, and again, there's a lot of talk about this these days, but actually being present in the moment. I say to my coaches, my coachees, look, I'm going to be totally present for you. I'm not going to be distracted during our sessions. And that I want you to do the same. If you have arrived at work and found that there's a pile of fires you have to put out, and you can't be present, I'd rather reschedule the meeting. And quite often, a lot of our interactions are, we're off looking somewhere else, or we're off thinking about something else. And I think it can extend the time of those interactions if people are not present. So working on, whether it's mindfulness or whatever methodology you're using, actually truly being present in the moment for your interaction is important. And that leads to, people feeling you're authentic and people trusting you.
Sure. And all of that, that it definitely resonates. It definitely makes sense, what you're saying, and that presence, being fully attentive, and showing the person that you're talking to that, it's a matter of mutual respect. You're fully engaged in whatever it is that they have to say, and then in turn, they'll be more willing and open to listen to you, because you're giving them that same level of respect that you're asking for. So it's, I definitely have seen that. I've seen that in practice as well. So, now it's in our current situation, right? Even you and I, we're talking through Zoom right now instead of sitting in a studio. So how, this concept of presence, and we know how important this is. So how can leaders, how can they drive this presence, create this feeling of presence when they don't have the physical, the environmental factors in their favor that they may have been able to rely on in the past? How do you do it virtually?
Yeah, so I think of this. I think this is 5 different pieces. The first is, it starts with yourself, right? In terms of you as the leader. I always say to my coachees that you can spend a lot of time trying to change other people, but ultimately, the only person you can change is yourself, and then people react differently to you. So it starts with you as a leader being self-aware of how you show up, and actually being very, I'm going to use the word intentional a few times here, but being very intentional about how you show up. And those things to me are down to having a level, and this, whether it's in person or whether it's over video, it is having a level of self-confidence. It's being passionate about what you're doing, right? It's coming back to this, having a purpose which you can get enthusiastic about. There is a level of comfort that you have with the interaction. And in the case of virtual, we're all learning. Those of us who've been doing this for a while think we know how to do it, but we're also all learning how to use this technology, right? And so having a comfort level with the technology. A lot of things like presenting and anything is really about understanding the audience, right? Really getting to know the audience. And I'm not just talking about casually, but I'm talking about really, you know, who you're interacting with and know where they're coming from and what the way they like to work and the background, etc. And then you've got to work really hard. In this first piece about your self-awareness, you've got to work really hard in terms of your verbal cues. Your non-verbal cues. I like Zoom because I can see myself. That's not an ego thing. It is, I'm actually also monitoring how I'm coming across to people.
It's true. You don't have that benefit when you're sitting across the table from somebody. You know, you don't know. You could have a piece of spinach stuck in your teeth. You could, you could be, you know, in somebody's face. You might be doing something that you're not aware of, and
yes,
that is
absolutely.
That is a nice benefit of the Zoom.
Unless you like to have meetings with mirrors behind you, which is a bit egotistical, to be honest. It doesn't work. So I think spending time really understanding and getting really aware about how you show up is important. I think the second piece is what we talked about. It is how do you manage that positive presence around things like empathy, around trust, authenticity, etc.
I think
really think. Sorry, Zach.
I think part of understanding that audience too, and kind of going through that checklist of your own, you can then do that with others, right? Like when you come into it and say, okay, am I fully present, right? Do I have, Absolutely. Is my lighting right? Can people hear me okay? Are the kids occupied? Is there going to be any distraction? And then that helps you then also think about your audience and what they might be going through, right? Like you might be fully present and in this pandemic environment, showered and clean shaven and ready to go, and your audience might not be. So
right.
I think it naturally it kind of lends itself to that empathy. If you take a look at, okay, these are the things that I did to be present. How is the audience feeling?
Yes, and it's and you can. There's lots of tools, right? You can use on Zoom, which is take a poll at the beginning of the meeting, if you like. As an example, take a poll at the beginning of the meeting about how people are feeling. Be also conscious that some people are not comfortable on screen. Mm-hmm. It's just people got different levels of comfort to seeing themselves on screen. So just be a little bit aware of that. The third piece, I think, is you've really got to be intentional about your communication. As we talked about, actually, Zach, the Zoom isn't perfect for dialogue because there is lag time. So you've got to be conscious of that. But also, think about using asynchronous and synchronous ways of delivering the meeting, right? If it's a meeting, do you put some videos up ahead? Do you record part of the meeting mm-hmm. so that you can focus just on the dialogue at the meeting? Mm-hmm. Pre-reads. So there's planning of the pre part of these interactions as well as the during and post.
Yeah.
I think tools like Zoom and others really help us with a number of things that we don't normally have in interactions. You can have breakout groups, you can take polls, you can have the Q&A function, you can have the chat function. All of these things are valuable ways of getting participation.
Sure.
Using breakout groups is really a useful tool.
Yeah, and I've noticed that as well. And I feel like when you have things like the chat room as well and the breakout groups, people process things differently, right? And some people
Absolutely.
that may not be willing to vocalize something, they can type something in the chat, and you don't have to hit send right away. You can always type it out. And like, I've noticed that in other group interactions that I'm in, that it kind of allows people to interact with each other in different ways, all at the same time. So it's
absolutely
unique.
Absolutely. And also we've got to think about how our agendas look, right? The long 2.5 hour, 3 hour meetings, that, are an hour and a half per session. People usually have an attention of between 10 and 18 minutes, right? And after each, so you've got to block your agendas into those chunks, so you give people a chance to. I think the word I heard used was people need time to graze after a period of discussion. And also, we've got to be realistic about the fact you can't achieve as much on a Zoom meeting as you could face to face. I keep using the word Zoom, but all the other types.
I mean, it's kind of, it's like people referring to Kleenexes for tissues. Words almost become interchangeable in 60 days. But I've also, I've noticed as well that, we went from a very, a hard start-stop environment to where everything was largely interpersonal to now everything is largely virtual. And, I noticed towards the end of the day, because we, in the beginning of the stay-at-home challenge, we organized a lot of social functions over Zoom, and it was kind of fun to get together and, toast a drink and interact with people. And, we wouldn't do that normally. So at the beginning, it was like, wow, I'm actually interacting with people more to a degree that live far away, because we have the time and we don't have any other distraction. This is all we have. But there's a Zoom fatigue sense too.
Yes, absolutely.
You get to after your 4th or 5th meeting of this very intense sensory environment, it can be challenging. So it's can also be tough. I think it speaks to your earlier points around getting to the point, right? Like having that tailored agenda, and whereas if you're in the office, you might grab hey, let's sit down for an hour and brainstorm. And Zoom, you don't have that luxury. You've got and on top of what people are doing right now, last couple of weeks, people are also wearing many more hats than they might be used to.
Yes, absolutely.
So they just don't have. It's hard to be present when you have all those different hats.
Yes. So the fourth piece, I think, is actually consciously setting up a positive environment. And what I mean by that is really work hard in ensuring that you're getting every voice heard. Look, every great team, or most great teams I've worked for, have groups of people with diverse experiences and ideas. And the more you can include, the more inclusive you can be to everyone is really important. You have to work hard to make sure that everybody on the call is being is given the chance to express that experience and those ideas. So really working on inclusiveness. And then the positive environment also is around just setting it up in terms of how you want it to be, right? So it might be that, and work with the team or whoever you're working with, just talk about, okay, what kind of environment do we want here? Do we want it to be professional? Right? Yeah. Do we want it to be casual? Do we expect people to not show up in their pajamas, or just do whatever they can to? Now, during this critical time, we've been very understanding of dogs walking across the screen, et cetera, and I think that's and also we've been quite tolerant about people's background screens and that kind of stuff. But I think as a team, if you can come to an agreement around what kind of meetings you want to have within the context of what people can do, and maybe, hey, we want a meeting where we're all in pajamas. Or whatever. So, I mean, think about, again, be intentional about the environment you want to set up. And then the final thing is, and this I think is often forgot, is if all the interactions you're having with a team is virtual, you've got to make time for building a social community, which means checking in at the start of meetings, right? How meet people where they are, checking at the start of meetings. It might be, having some icebreakers. It might be putting aside some time for getting to know each other. All of the kind of things that you do, water cooler discussion and icebreaking physically you do at meetings. You might want you need to build that into the interactions. And then, we always talk about the celebrating achievements. Shouldn't forget that even in this environment, you need to celebrate the achievements of people.
Sure.
And then, to your point earlier, and I think this is really an important point from a leader's perspective. It's easy to get Zoom fatigue. It's easy to get overloaded with all the stuff. Working the Zoom, making sure people are included, etc. And what I've done in the past, and I've done this role in the past, is to be an online facilitator. Have somebody who is monitoring the team dynamics, have somebody that's monitoring the chat, have somebody that's monitoring the questions, have somebody that's monitoring who's participating and who's not participating. Get some help, right? And get some professional outside help or appoint somebody in your team, however you want to do that, right?
Yeah. That's a great point, because I was on a podcast or a discussion earlier this week, and they had a moderator, and it was great. It was great because then we were able to pull the questions off of the chat too, so that you were able to, because when you're in a group environment, you're face to face, there's nonverbal cues that somebody has something to say, but when you're looking at that Brady Bunch window on Zoom, you don't always see that. You don't always know if someone's ready or not. And, especially with, so you have to, I like what you said there. You have to work harder to make that.
Absolutely.
But
yes.
So I feel like some of these things that, people are having to do to create over Zoom, I feel like that can also help leaders sharpen those skills as they return. So, as we start to mobilize, right? We're starting to move back to work, in different parts of the country, and there's different guidelines in different places. But so there's a lot of uncertainty that's still out there as we go back to work. So, I mean, there's challenges, there's opportunities in both of that. So, what do you see as the the top one or two things that are really critical for leaders to manage through this and to help bring their teams back?
Yeah, so I can talk to what I'm doing with my little world here, but also I think some thoughts that I've had in terms of other leaders. There are a number of ways that we can come back. We can come back virtually, only virtually, right? We have our teams only virtually, and I've talked to some people that actually have started new jobs, and they're starting new jobs only virtually, right? They're not meeting their team, and they're not meeting their. We can come back physically, but that obviously is going to be different, as you say, with different situations. Or we can come back in a hybrid of those. And I think there's a real opportunity if leaders are innovative in the way they provide customer value to use all three of those. And there are some, even though we've been put in a situation where we've had to learn very quickly, Zoom and other virtual ways of working, there's some real value in thinking about, maybe I should be doing some asynchronous stuff anyway, right? Even if we're physically meeting, maybe there should be make some videos, which are easy to do. Maybe presentation, the 2-hour presentations could be recorded so people can look at them at their convenience rather than sit in a meeting for 2 hours just looking at slides. So there's some great opportunity. There's opportunity to think about new ways of doing your business. I think the second thing that strikes me is we need to optimize our systems in terms of how we manage. And what I mean by that is that old management ways may not fit into the new world. So you're going to think about, actually, how do I modify my management model to now fit into this and get even more from it? And I think the third thing, and if you as a leader you're not experienced in managing and leading change, you need to be. And I think, or get somebody that is an expert in that, right? Because it's a competence I think leaders need to be very effective at both themselves and their organizations in being flexible, agile, and leading change. So those are the three things that strike me. Now, obviously, there are details depending on everyone's coming from a different place and have different challenges. But I think if you think about how make the most of the three models, right? Physical, virtual, and hybrid, optimize your management systems to those, whatever works for you, be innovative around that, and then lead to change.
And I think it ties back to some of your earlier points around the coaching foundation, around having that growth mindset. You've got to be open to those new ways of learning, and there's new discoveries. When we were talking earlier, you said, well, you made a comment that the genie's out of the bottle, right? So we had in some cases where folks might have been hesitant to embrace virtual environments. In the last 90 days, for some companies, that was the only way they could conduct business. So they were forced to try new things. So now, now that the genie's out, there are things that we've learned that may lead to even more productive teams and better equipped leaders or more self-aware leaders, as you talked about earlier. So this has been great, Charles. I really appreciate this. As Steve and I introduced season 2, we added a new little flavor to this, right, to help give a little bit more background to the person behind the microphone. So I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions that we call. So 6 questions, and I want you to give a one word, no longer than one sentence answer, just first thing that pops into your mind to help our audience get to know you a little bit differently.
That sounds very daunting, Zach, for some reason. Anyway.
So I promise there's no physical feats of strength or anything. I'm not going to make you hop up and down on one foot or do any complex algebra. But first question for you is, what's one thing you would most like to do in your life that you haven't yet done?
That's a good question. I actually would. I hate these questions because they're all. It makes me think too hard, Zach. But certainly, look. One of the things that I have enjoyed and hopefully will enjoy again is travel. I've been lucky enough to go to India and once in the past, and I would love to go back to India.
India. All right.
And Japan. I've never been to Japan. Japan. There we go. Sorry, that's 2 words. India and Japan.
There we go. I'm with you on the travel piece. All right. So number 2, in your opinion, what's one thing that our world needs right now?
The one thing our world needs right now is, I would say, and it's not changed, it's listening. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Thank you. So if you were back in school today, thinking about starting a career, what would you want to be when you grew up?
The reason I'm hesitating is because I'm actually quite happy with. I was going to say be a coach, but that isn't. I would like to. I think I'd like to have got into teaching a lot earlier in my life. So I think teaching.
Teaching. Okay, great. So next question, what hobby or activity outside of your work brings you joy?
T- Premier League, Chelsea Football Club. Sorry, that's going to put a lot of people.
Premier League. All right, there we go. And I can't believe your UK friends dared call you an American with that answer.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, they're all Liverpool supporters.
So next question. So what person, living or past, has inspired you the most?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question. Person that's inspired me the most. Well, I don't mean this as anything other than I have 4 children and 2 grandchildren that inspire me every day, and mainly because of their flexibility and they're being brought up in an environment which is totally different, and they just deal with it. The resilience level is huge. You know, being sent back from university to do online, they just bounce through it. You know, I think that level of bounce back and resilience is.
That's great. Thank you. And last question. So what is the last thing you read?
The last thing I read was Steven Pinker's book on the Enlightenment.
All right. Great. Thank you. So I've been talking today with Charles Dormer, principal and founder of APEX STP, educator, coach, and thought leader on creating energy and engagement in organizations. Be sure to check out his company at apexstp.com and feel free to connect with Charles on LinkedIn. Charles, thanks again for your time. I've had a lot of fun. Best of luck in your upcoming academic endeavors.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it very much.
Special thanks to our technical producer, Dan Shields. And I'm Zach Davis with Learning Aloud, a podcast for the organizational dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania.